You know, sometimes a booklet surprises you, or rather the number of persons who want it surprises you. That's the way it's been with this one. I never realized that so many persons had questions about unanswered prayer. Evidently, this business of wrong answers or no answers to prayer is a very common experience. The new supplies just come from the printers. I don't think I'll ever handle one of these that I don't think of the person who, in a sense, caused me to write it. She's Mrs. Richard Randall, a faithful member of the church in almost every way. But her son Dick had an automobile accident, and it was serious, a spinal injury. Though the doctors were doing everything that they could for him, they feared paralysis. After 2 weeks came the final verdict. Dick would never again have the use of his legs. I went to Mrs. Randall just as soon as I received the news.
How did you know he was paralyzed?
Dr. Ryder called me. I went right to the hospital, but you had already left.
I didn't know you were coming. Did you talk to Dick?
Dick was still asleep. The nurse said she hoped he would sleep for several more hours.
I wonder if it wouldn't be better if he kept right on sleeping. Never did wake up.
These last 2 weeks have been very trying on you, Mrs. Randall, but you don't mean that.
No, I suppose I don't. But he's so young, Dr. Goodrich. Too young to face all the rest of his life a helpless invalid.
It's very hard for you to accept, I know. But if you can just hang on to your faith...
But how can I? When the one thing I prayed would not happen did happen. I didn't pray that he would be spared pain. I didn't even pray that he wouldn't be crippled. But I did pray and pray that he wouldn't be paralyzed.
These things are so difficult to understand, but believe me, Mrs. Randall, God didn't want Dick to be paralyzed.
Didn't he? For 2 weeks, Dick's verdict hung in the balance. I never doubted that God would hear my prayers and tip the scales in Dick's favor. Why didn't he, Dr. Goodrich?
I think God did hear your prayer.
And I don't think I can ever trust him again.
But you do want to trust him and need to depend on him, don't you?
The God I've believed in and trusted all my life was like a father. He loved us, cared what happened to us, listened to us, and helped us. After this, how can I trust him again?
God has not forsaken Dick or you, Mrs. Randall. Tomorrow, if I can arrange it, will you do something which I believe might help you to recover that faith?
I don't believe I can.
Will you try?
Yes, I'll try.
Obviously, Mrs. Randall was almost in a state of shock. When a person's in the midst of a tragic experience like that, it's really useless to try to reason with them. That's why it's so important for us to prepare ourselves beforehand, so that we may have some understanding which will help us to meet an emergency. Instead of trying to talk with Mrs. Randall then, I had an idea that if I could get her to come to know someone who had been through such an experience, she might solve some of her own problems, find some of the answers to her question. I arranged then for her to go to the home of Mrs. Morgan, the mother of 2 lovely children, running her home in a wonderful way from a wheelchair. Polio had left its mark some years beforehand. This was the person that I wanted Mrs. Randall to know, although I didn't tell her of the situation before she went to call.
Oh, Jerry, would you run to the door, dear, and see who that is, please?
Sure. Now I think we're all finished. Here's your crown. And your wand. Let's see.
Mom, this is Miss Randall.
Hello, Mrs. Randall.
How do you do, Mrs. Morgan?
Dr. Goodrich said that I might expect you to call. We're so glad you came. The fairy godmother here is our daughter, Dottie. And you've met Jerry, our son. Children, Mrs. Randall.
Hello, children.
How you do, Mrs. Randall? I met her.
What a lovely costume.
Thank you.
Jerry, move those things so Miss Randall can sit down. Will you please, dear?
Why don't you wave your magic wand and make them disappear, Dottie? May I wear it, please, Mom, if I'm very careful? May I, Mommy?
I suppose so. But you'd better leave your wand and your crown here because you're going to have your hands full.
Oh, thank you, Mommy. Can I get some gum?
Do you have a nickel?
Yep.
Okay, then. Well, run along with your sister. Haven't you forgotten something?
I'm very glad to have met you, Mrs. Randall. Glad to have met you, Miss Randall.
Thank you, Dottie, Jerry. Bye.
Be careful crossing the street. They get so excited.
Yes, they do. They're very attractive children, Mrs. Morgan.
Thank you. We're proud of them. They were just babies when this happened to you.
Mrs. Morgan, I had no idea that you were, well, of your condition, or I never would have imposed myself upon you.
Dr. Goodrich told me about your son's accident. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Randall.
Thank you. I haven't been able to pull myself together, but I never doubted that everything would work out all right.
Dr. Goodrich said that you felt that your prayers had not been answered.
With Dick as he is, I don't see how I could feel otherwise. When I needed God the most, he wasn't there.
I think he was.
Was he there when you needed him?
It didn't seem so at the time, but he was.
Can you be sure of that?
Yes, I can. Mrs. Randall, when you first heard of Dick's accident, you immediately cried out to God for help, didn't you?
Yes, of course.
So did I when they told me I had polio. And though accidents happen every minute of every hour, it's hard to believe that one could involve your son, isn't it?
Yes, I guess it is.
There were 15 cases of polio here when I got it. But I still couldn't believe that it was happening to me. I tried not praying. Thought I couldn't pray. But I found myself crying out in despair. And sometimes even against God.
I know.
But then one night, almost as clear as the spoken word, it came to me. How much I still had left. I could talk, and I could see, and I still had the use of my hands. But above all else, I had my family, my husband, and my children. And I began to ask God to show me how to use the gifts I still had left.
And you believe he did show you?
It was not always plain. But prayer kept me in touch with God. Thoughts came to me that I never would have had. Plans became clear. When my rebellion changed into determination to overcome, I learned what these hands could do. Not only everyday things for my family, but things like these, too.
They're nice. Your painting means a great deal to you, doesn't it?
Yes. And I've never enjoyed books so much as I have these past few years. And music. A whole new world has opened up before me.
Then you believe that even though God didn't cure you, he answered your prayer.
My life is not the way I'd planned, nor is it the way I would have chosen. But I sometimes wonder if the lessons that I've learned in patience and understanding through all this haven't meant more to us than my being able to walk. A prayer is not so much an answer as a contact.
Contact?
It was through prayer that I made contact with God. A contact that gave me the assurance of his presence. And that's the best answer to every prayer.
Miss Jones.
Oh, hello, Mrs. Randall.
How's Dick?
Better? He has a visitor with him now.
A visitor? I thought he couldn't have visitors.
This one's different. It's your minister, Dr. Goodrich.
I'm glad.
I thought you would be.
How long has he been here?
Oh, quite a while. I had to interrupt him to give Mr. Randall his shot.
Oh, hello, Mrs. Randall. I was afraid I was going to miss seeing you.
Oh, Dr. Goodrich, I'm so glad you've been talking to Dick. What did he say? What do you think about him?
Well, as I told you earlier, he's got a long period of adjustment ahead of him. But it's no worse than to be expected.
Dr. Goodrich, did you know Mrs. Morgan when she...
I knew her when she was just like this.
She's an amazing woman.
She certainly is.
I wish I understood everything she said today.
And you will. And that's awfully important to Dick. How quickly he is able to adjust depends largely on you.
It does?
Yes. For instance, right now, one of his greatest concerns for the future is saddling you with the care of a hopeless invalid.
Oh, Dr. Goodrich, I've never thought about the care of him. That isn't it. It's Dick.
I know it's not a part of your problem, but it's a part of his. It's vital to him.
Then you mean I must make him understand that the
You
care...
must make him understand that you don't think life is over for him. That you have faith in a God who still cares about his future. And Dick's going to have to draw on you for strength to believe that.
I don't know if I have it.
You know where to find it.
Yes. And you'll help me?
Yes. I'll see both of you tomorrow afternoon, but in the meantime, if there's anything, call me. Goodbye, Mrs. Randall.
Goodbye.
After that experience, I wrote some things about unanswered prayer for Mrs. Randall. Some of her friends and others asked for copies of it, and it was finally necessary to put it into this printed form. Maybe you would like to have a copy of unanswered prayer, either for yourself or for some friend. I'd be glad to send you one free and postpaid if you'll simply take a card and address it to me, the pastor, in care of this station. And on the other side of the card at the top, write the words unanswered prayer, and then your name, your address, your city and state. Be sure to put the words unanswered prayer at the top, and then your name, your address, your city and state, and address it to me, the pastor, in care of this station. And I'll put your copy of unanswered prayer in the mail to you immediately. There's a promise in the Bible which any one of us can claim. I think it has to do with prayer. Here are the words. If with all your heart ye truly seek me, ye shall most surely find me.